Especially amongst Sega fans, Treasure is revered as one of the most consistently innovative developers of all time. While they cut their teeth on side-scrollers and action platformers, their brightest design accomplishment was the creation of this duo of shoot-'em-ups. For a first effort, Radiant Silvergun is quite an anomaly. As a post-Neon Genesis Evangelion and Final Fantasy VII title, it was the first to present a shoot-'em-up in a dramatic way. The Saturn version has a relatively in-depth storyline, and the experience feels like it builds towards something. In an unusual fashion, the game starts from the third level. You usually don't see the word epic being used to describe a shooter, but for the lack of a better word, that's what this game feels like. The sweeping camera angles and 3D backgrounds add a sense of grandeur and vertigo to the action, while Hitoshi Sakimoto's unusual score has a Final Fantasy-esque sound to it. While some of the polygon effects haven't aged well visually, the 2D backgrounds look crisp, if flat. The trippy cyberspace overlays and stylish pre-boss warning animation garnish the otherwise humdrum visuals. While the presentation is novel, what the game is really known for is its unique weapon system. The player has access to 7 different weapons from the get-go, and there are no floating power-up icons or bombs. There's a forward and a backward shot, 2 different homing attacks, a stream of lightning, and a sword, which defaults to full circle swings. Though you can also control the sword by keeping the button pressed, it's difficult to do so accurately, but it deals large amounts of damage. It also has another function, as you can absorb these pink projectiles with the blade. After they fill this gauge, you can unleash a special attack that renders the ship temporarily invulnerable. While the Saturn version maps different weapons to different buttons, the default control scheme is very efficient as it only uses 3 different buttons. Radiant Silvergun also differentiates itself from most other shooters with its scoring system. Fans of the genre judge games by how deep and well designed the scoring is. But in the vast majority of games, casual players can ignore the intricacies of the scoring system completely, either unknowingly or by choice. In Radiant Silvergun, the scoring system is very integral to the gameplay. All regular enemies are divided into 3 different colors: red, blue, and yellow. You can chain a score by repeatedly killing enemies of a certain color. Doing so increases your score, which in turn levels up one of your 3 main weapons, based on which you were using. You can end up in a tough situation later on in the game if your weapons are insufficiently leveled. Of course, there's more to the scoring system than that. For example, you can start a secret chain by killing a red, blue, and yellow enemy in a row. Bosses have moving body parts which you can try to dismantle before the timer runs out and the boss self-destructs. Doing so nets you bonus points. What's novel about the scoring system of Silvergun is the fact that you're incentivized to avoid 2/3 of the enemies. While the system is beginner-friendly and easy to grasp due to the color coding, that doesn't mean that getting high scores is a walk in the park. You have to be careful what you shoot in order to avoid breaking a chain by accidentally shooting a different colored enemy. And sticking to just one color instead of shooting indiscriminately can easily take away your focus from all the projectiles and other hazards you're supposed to avoid. It's a good initiation to the world of score hunting, but many competitive shoot-'em-up players dislike the system due to its rigid nature and simplicity. There isn't as much room for improvisation, and the designers have the player on a tight leash. While skilled players might bemoan the linear, one-right solution approach, it isn't an issue for casual and intermediate players. The good thing about this design approach, and the large reason why the game is such a classic, is the fact that the whole game looks and feels beautifully orchestrated. Even though the bosses are visually uninteresting for the most part, their attack patterns are amazing. While bullet hell games sometimes craft beautiful bullet curtains, Radiant Silvergun's approach to designing difficult encounters feels more interesting. The movement speed is slower and the overall design is more akin to classic R-type style shooters that relied more on environmental hazards and physical attack rather than dense projectile patterns. This completely changes how the battles feel, as the screen isn't just littered with hundreds of purple objects. The game feels less abstract. It looks more natural to dodge hazards like missiles, laser beams, and huge mechanical contraptions that try to crush your ship. But that doesn't mean the patterns aren't intricate. On the contrary, while they might not look as graceful as some of those aforementioned bullet curtains, the designers are bombarding you from every direction, which looks amazing in motion, while being simultaneously relentless, yet fair for the player. Thanks to your ship's diverse arsenal of weapons, you can always position yourself to a safe spot from where you can shoot the enemy. That gives gameplay a lot of depth, as you can approach situations from different directions. It can also divert your attention from dodging attacks, as you sometimes have got to switch your weapons on the fly, whereas in cave shooters, you just alternate between a spread and a concentrated shot. This game is filled with boss fights, so the designers were given many chances to wow the players. While some fights aren't as well designed as others, there are some unprecedented encounters. One of the most interesting examples is a huge boss that fills the screen and rotates on its axle. During the fight, you can fly back and forth while the camera rotates 360 degrees, which is a refreshing change of pace from the usual static screens. A far less fun innovation is an encounter where you have to chase a boss while trying to avoid crashing into walls. Despite its cinematic trappings, Radiant Silvergun is a really design-oriented game. The bosses reflect that well. Few more novel cases aside, there isn't any effort put into making them visually appealing, or even to make them resemble actual aircraft. They're just random collections of geometric shape that are there to serve their mechanical purpose, which is very ironic considering my earlier statement about how the battles somehow feel less abstract and gamey. As in many of these projectile-filled manic shooters and bullet hells, the boss sprites are painstakingly detailed and animated. The polygon models could also be accused of causing a few situations where it's hard to tell whether or not touching an object will kill you, but that's a minor gripe. The biggest fault in Radiant Silvergun's design that players of all skill levels can agree upon is the plotting pace. It's just too long for repeated playthroughs. Thankfully, designer Hiroshi Iuchi rectified that problem when making Ikaruga. While the game retains many core aspects of Radiant Silvergun, it also differs from it quite a lot. Bigger and more complex isn't automatically better, and sometimes streamlining can benefit a game's design by giving it a sharper focus. Ikaruga stripped away Radiant Silvergun to its core, cutting the length to a third, reducing the amount of weapons to just 2, and removing one color from the equation entirely. Iuchi saw the problem with Silvergun's scoring system, where you had to let certain enemies escape. He also wanted to mimic the defensive system of the absurdly expensive Saturn-exclusive Psychic Killer Tarumaru. What he ended up creating is a classic example of an easy-to-learn but hard-to-master game with airtight design. The whole game is based on a polarity system which subverts your ingrained habit of trying to avoid projectiles. You can alter your ship's color at any time you want with the press of a button, as every single enemy in the game is either black or white. When you're white, you can absorb white bullets and do double damage against black enemies, and vice versa. This time around, you only had 2 guns, a regular shot and a powerful homing shot you can perform after filling a meter by absorbing enemy projectiles. The fuller the meter, the more devastating that attack becomes. You can use it to make short work of more powerful enemies, or to clear out a wave of weak enemies. Interestingly enough, this mechanic makes a playthrough on hard difficulty partially easier, as when you aren't playing on easy, enemies fire a barrage of bullets if you destroy a ship of the same color. You can use this to your advantage by intentionally doing so and then absorbing the bullets. The designers were fully aware of this effect and gave the player many chances to fill up their meter for upcoming challenges. There are brief interval periods before bosses when the game throws a wave of popcorn enemies at you. If you just keep shooting, you can plow through them in an instant, but they provide experienced players a chance to fill up their special gauge, as well as a scoring challenge. There are also larger enemies which shoot a concentrated laser with a pushback effect. Throwing yourself in their line of fire can fill up your gauge in an instant, but later on, in the 3rd stage, this mechanic is used in a maze, where standing on a line of fire can easily push you to a wall and kill you. Even further down the line, some bosses attack so relentlessly that just trying to stay alive by absorbing bullets and occasionally releasing a homing attack feels like the intended course of action. There are other shoot-'em-ups that have experimented with different shield mechanics as well, but granting the player permanent immunity towards half the oncoming projectiles is quite a bold step. On paper it sounds easy, but in reality the game is nothing but that. While there's more downtime than in other shooters, moments where you are safe are truly rare. Every time either color dominates the screen, there's enough projectiles of the other color to force you to at least do some planning. The first boss starts off by shooting strings of white bullets while its minions fire black ones more sparsely. A safer choice would be to dodge the black bullets while absorbing the white ones. But a more efficient solution is to switch your affinity to black and shoot the boss for double damage while dodging the white bullets. The second wave reverses the colors and makes the pattern more dense, so it's harder to deal double damage. Similarly, the second level has a section where rotating turrets shoot a constant stream of bullets. This forces you to practice split-second polarity switching in the areas where two different colored streams intersect. A smart player will try to eat up as many bullets as possible and clear the screen with homing attacks to make the situation easier. Ikaruga's presentation helps to make the intricate level design and patterns feel more impressive. While the technically adequate but ultimately utilitarian and bland graphics lack character and detail, the music builds the experience as something that's bigger than a mere shoot-'em-up, and it's well synchronized with what's happening on the screen. Yuji had a very specific pacing in mind, and wanted the design to reflect that. Both calm and up-tempo songs reflect the peaks and valleys of the level design, which sometimes even uses short transition animations to punctuate the different mood transitions that occur during the experience. It's really rare for a shoot-'em-up to care so much about conveying different moods, and it's remarkable that Ikaruga manages to do so in a non-verbal manner that works much better than Radiant Silvergun's narrative. Ikaruga is one of the few modern shoot-'em-ups that has gained a lot of recognition outside of the small competitive shoot-'em-up community, and it's easy to see why. The black and white simplicity makes it easy for the uninitiated to appreciate its ingenious design. Everything is in plain view and there's no complex web of interactions working beneath the hood, so it's no wonder that game journalists lavishly praised it as the best shoot-'em-up of all time. Ikaruga makes appreciating the art of game design accessible. The whole game is such a finely tuned spectacle that it looks as graceful as ballet when played by a skilled player who can clear the entire game without dying. However, it's a polarizing title amongst the shoot-'em-up community, as it isn't so much a game you play as one you memorize. The scoring system isn't based on strictly shooting ships of the same color, but in shooting ships of the same color in the pairs of 3 at a time. While chains max out earlier than in Silvergun, even one of the first waves of level 1 showcased that maintaining one is far from easy. Many enemy groups swerve in such patterns that it's easy to accidentally shoot the wrong colored ship. Maintaining a chain while simultaneously clearing the game without dying is extremely challenging. But like I said, some competitive players really dislike the game because they find the scoring system to be simplistic and tedious, with hardly any room for experimentation. Some even call it a puzzle game disguised as a shooter. While that assessment is an exaggeration, there is a sudden difficulty spike in the 4th level, after which it can feel like you have to slowly learn to do what the designers want you to do through pixel-perfect trial and error. Ikaruga is a harsh mistress, and unlike modern games, it forces you to work to get better at it. You are first given 3 credits for trying to clear the game, which translates to 9 lives. In the GameCube version, you have to play an hour for every new credit. There's a practice mode, but you can only practice stages you've already beaten, so to practice the final stage, you must first beat the game, which is really backwards. I'm a casual player when it comes to shoot-'em-ups, and I haven't put many hours into this game, but I'm still somewhat ashamed to admit that I've never made it to the 5th and final level with the default 3 credits. With a bit of practice, I can make it to the 3rd boss without dying, but the 4th level just destroys me. While I might not be very good at it, I can't help but respect Ikaruga. It's a game with less than 30 minutes worth of content that was sold at a retail price even in Western markets. As the modern gaming industry has moved more and more towards games that pander to the lowest common denominator by making you feel good when you are in fact barely interacting with the game at all, or at the other end of the spectrum towards directionless sandboxes that go for a feature-rich yet shallow kitchen sink approach due to the lack of any original ideas, it's refreshing to see a game which doesn't subscribe to the notion that gamers are entitled to a set amount of easily digestible content because they're paying customers. Ikaruga neither bloats nor streamlines its design to dogmatically follow trends, but rather designs everything around the core gameplay. Each aspect of the design is a cog in a larger machine, working towards a common goal. There's cohesion and purity in its design. It's a video game in its purest form, one that you play for the sake of gameplay because it's fun to play and to get better at it. But that's a description that isn't limited to just Ikaruga. It applies to any good shoot-'em-up. Ikaruga isn't the be-all end-all of the genre. There's plenty of clever design and mechanical variation within games that don't deviate from the norms, even if most shoot-'em-ups look superficially similar to the layman. Now, before I wrap this thing up, I would like to say a word about Hiroshi Iuchi. He was responsible for the design, effects, and backgrounds on both games. Plus, he composed Ikaruga's score as well. He played a similarly important part in the development of Gradius 5. After that, he didn't work on anything of note until Kokuga was released on the 3DS in 2012. While it was released in the West, only Japan got a physical release. It's not really a regular shoot-'em-up, and I can't capture 3DS footage, so I won't be covering it. He's currently working on a shooter called Ubusana for PS4. Let's hope that turns out well.